with DSP. He had worked with DSP. He was a senior fund manager with Avendus PMS. He is quite experienced in hand, and he knows market in and out. And he will definitely try his best to answer all your questions. So, without doing much ado and without taking much of your time, I invite Anirudh Naha to take it forward. Welcome, Anirudh.
Yeah, thank you, Neeraj. Thank you, everyone, especially to take off time on a Saturday, trying to understand and giving us an opportunity to interact. I hope everyone at your end is doing well. So what we can do is we can start off with our views on the market. Then we can subsequently probably, look at what one needs to look at while investing into a stock, etc. And then finally, we'll talk about the funds that I manage, and we can then have a Q&A. So coming to the markets, let's start with the risks that we see. I think so that is of paramount importance where the markets are, especially given the dichotomy that you see. At least one sense is that given that the economy is going through a slowdown and things are painful, the markets are at the other end at the peak. So what's happening exactly? The first risk, frankly, is the risk of the COVID issue that we are facing now. Due to COVID, initially, at least after the first wave, things had opened up. But in this second wave, we are clearly seeing the lockdowns getting more in number to that extent. It started with weekend lockdowns, and then it has moved to weekly lockdowns. Some of the places like Mumbai, etc., we are now moving into a 1.5 month lockdown, literally. And a lockdown per se is not great for the economy. Vis-a-vis the last year's lockdown, of course, there are two differences apparently between the lockdowns then and this year. And that is something that I would like to highlight. The first one is the fact that the last year's lockdown was far more severe. It was 2 months, but 2 months across the country, and the severity was very high. To that extent, if you look at the lockdowns here, these are more regional or state level lockdowns. And in these lockdowns also, a lot of B2B businesses are doing fine. Things are moving on, whether it is logistics, cement, steel, transportation of goods and services, etc. It is the B2C segments, some of the segments which have really taken a knock. So whether it is the hospitality industry, hotels, tourism, travel, multiplexes, malls, retail chains, the B2C segment has taken an impact. But the B2B segment, there is still business activity. It is not zero. And hence, things definitely are far better than what it was in the last lockdown. This is the first difference that one needs to keep at the back of our mind. The second and more important difference between the last year's lockdown and this year's lockdown is the fact that there is a solution this time around. Last year, when the lockdown was severe, people didn't have an idea of what the solution was going to be like. This year around, we've clearly seen that in the Western world, where people have got vaccinated anywhere above 40%, the US has just crossed 50% for its adult population. Things are opening up, death rates are very muted, and in fact, even in a country like Israel, they've actually taken off the mandate of you don't need to wear a mask to that extent if you're not going into crowded areas. And Israel hasn't been reporting any major casualties because of COVID. So there is a solution. Clearly, the way we look at India, and not just what the government is talking about, but when we look at the supply chain of vaccines into the country, I think by August, September, the availability of vaccines will go up manifold. The government is talking about 200 billion doses, 2 billion doses, 2 billion doses by December, which is 200 crore vaccines. Even if you conservatively say that it's going to be 1 billion or 100 crore doses, now 100 crore doses, 2 doses per person would mean that 50 crore people will get vaccinated by December. If it is 18 plus category, 50 crores people getting vaccinated is more than 50% of the adult population, which is a big statement. Now, can this happen? It is definitely possible. On the supply side, I think so the next 3 months, people are going to get surprised by the number of vaccines or the availability of vaccines. So that is some where once that visibility comes through, we think a lot of sentiments in the markets will change for the positive. So availability of vaccines will probably add a lot of clarity to the businesses. Now, the second risk that we see is how global growth, inflation, and hence interest rates behave in the world and India. We've already seen in India the WPI, the wholesale price index, has crossed 10%. We're seeing crude petrol has crossed 100 in Mumbai today. So there are inflationary pressures, no doubt on that. In the US, the growth is coming back. The economies have opened up. So what in the US, what used to be only technology companies doing well, all of a sudden, all the discretionary consumption, opening up trades are doing pretty well in the US because things are definitely there. In fact, there are pictures which have gone viral where people are standing in queues for 2.5 hours to move into a branded ladies purse shop to that extent in the US. So that is the kind of frenzy that is there. Opening up will definitely drive economies. It will also cause inflation because of the lockdown, the supply side has been impacted. With the opening up of the economy, things came back fast. Demand came back really fast, whereas the supply has not been able to has not been met to that extent. So it would be inflationary. In the US, the 10-year, which is a gauge of how inflation and growth is, this was about 0.7% about 6 months back. Today, when we look at it, from that 0.7%, it has moved to 1.75 and then stabilized around 1.6 today. What this meant is money is slowly becoming expensive because things are inflationary. So rates are slowly moving up. But the move from 0.7 to 1.75 has created a lot of frenzy because that was a big move which happened in 6 months' time for the US 10-year. Now, what impact this has? This has a bit of a negative impact actually for emerging markets and commodities generally. So that is the fear that if interest rates continue to move up in the US and let's say move towards 2.5% on the US 10-year, which is about 70, 80 to 90 bips from where they are today, there would definitely be an FII outflow, a case for FIIs to sell out of India and emerging markets and get back into the US. So rising rates is the second risk that we see in the world. And this is something that we are very closely tracking. Other than your COVID issue that we discussed and the interest rate scenario that we discussed, frankly speaking, in the near term, we do not foresee any major risks. And I wouldn't be able to highlight any other major risks than what we are talking of as of now. Now, coming to the overall markets, what is the view on the markets? This is, we will break this up into three parts. First is from a perspective of liquidity. Second is the macroeconomic data point. And third is the corporate earnings perspective. Now, from a liquidity perspective, there is enough and more of liquidity on the domestic side. See, you'll have to understand that the FD rates in the country are today are around 5% or 6%. Post-tax, the returns are below 4% to that extent. Savings rate has also come up. Now, finally, if inflationary pressures start building in, if there is a sign of inflation, the interest rate that a person is making is actually negative today in fixed deposits or savings bank accounts. Invariably, at some point, they will realize that we need to make positive, at least some positive, returns over and above the inflation. And that is where we will over time see people incrementally move towards equities to compensate for the inflationary pressures that are there. Also, a lot of people have missed out on the rally. So whenever the markets correct, you are going to see people invest or come back into the markets, deploying money into the equity markets through mutual funds, direct stocks, etc., whatever it is. But you will see that happen. Uh, Finally, FII flows in the country have slowed down. Last 3-4 months, FIIs have been neutral to negative actually. There are no major outflows. This has happened because the US interest rates have moved up dramatically, and hence people are skeptical about putting money into emerging markets today. Incrementally, if you have the interest rates move up further, there is a decent chance that the people will sell out of equities and probably move money out of the country. So one needs to be very careful about this. Uh, so from a liquidity perspective, please keep in mind, if you have something like 2.5% on the US 10-year, the FIIs will definitely sell and move out of the country. That is the only negative that we see in the liquidity perspective. But the selling of FIIs should be more than, the domestic money should be more than able to compensate the selling if and when it happens. Now coming to the macro point. This is a very interesting discussion because macros clearly, when you look around, it presents different pictures. It's like, the elephant in the room and the blind man trying to figure out what's happening. Uh, but one thing that we see clearly, and this is something where we borrow the ideas from, let's say, what the economists are saying. Now, in between the two waves, the first wave and the second wave, the economy actually did very well. It was coming back very strongly, if you remember. The GDP numbers were strong. Our belief, and generally across the street, GDP estimates were raised. Last year, April, May, when there was a complete lockdown, the GDP estimates for FY22, which is the present financial year, was about 0%. And then the economy opened up, the GDP estimates went to 2%, 3%, 5%, 8%. It went all the way to 11 to 13%, depending on whichever economist you look at, whether it is the World Bank or any of the rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, etc. Every number was between 11 to 13%. The second wave was a disaster. I think so. The impact was very hard. It has touched every family probably in some way or the other. And there has been economic impact definitely. And hence, to that extent, from an 11-13% kind of GDP estimate, today things have come down to about 9-10%. And there has been about 100 to 200 or 300 whips cut in the GDP estimates for FY22, this financial year. Having said that, in spite of all the pain, and if the economy starts opening up post vaccination, more or less, we still believe, even at 8%, let's say conservatively, if you have a GDP growth of 8%, India will still be among the fastest growing economies at that point of time. And hence, we aren't that negative, irrespective of whatever we see around. Now, mind you, the next year, if we build in what at least the government and our vaccination models, etc., are suggesting, the next year should be a year where more or less the COVID pain is over. A large part of it. Maybe children would be the only segment where vaccinations will come through. It will take a little more time. But in the US, we are clearly seeing Pfizer is already vaccinating children above 15 years of age. So it's a matter of time. But the children don't add too much of economic activity. So to that extent, FY23 should be a strong year. And FY23 has the chances of delivering more than 10% GDP growth again. So if we look at it in this scenario, we are presently in a scenario where 2 years consecutively, we will have 8 to 9% of GDP or more, which is a very strong statement for a country like India, because we haven't seen this in the previous probably 8 years, where 2 consecutive strong earnings have come. If you look at more specific data points on economy, before the COVID wave hit, the demand for electricity, the demand for petrol, diesel, the GST collections, the demand for steel, the demand for cement, port activity, transportation of goods and services, e-commerce activity. Every data point that we looked at, it was really very strong data point that was coming through. And I believe once this COVID situation, the vaccinations get available, which should start happening from June onwards and July onwards, I think so, availability of vaccines will go up further, you will see a lot of this come back towards normalcy. So I wouldn't be very negative on economic data points. Yes, today where we look at it, it looks expensive, etc. Or because we look at too much of negative news that is floating around on the shows related to the society. There are definitely things look bleaker, but we would continue to be pretty positive on the economy. Now coming to the corporate earnings part of it. See, corporate earnings also, which is basically earnings of the businesses around. The, again, their corporate earnings will look pretty strong into FY22 and FY23. In fact, the first quarter numbers for this calendar year between December to March, which was one quarter where there was not much of a COVID impact before the second wave hit us, I think numbers have been phenomenally strong. So corporate India today, to give you a sense of how well they are placed. In the last 5-6 years, corporate India has gone ahead. See, they generate profits and cash flows, right? Corporate India. They can either repay debt or use it to pay dividend or invest in their own business. These are the three outlets they have. Corporate India generally in the last 5-7 years has gone ahead and used their cash flows to repay debt. So once they have paid their debt, they are in a far stronger position today because they don't have any outflow on interest. So they are far stronger than what they used to be. Today, corporate India on their balance sheets has one of the lowest debt levels in the last 5-7 years. This mention this because if there is a lockdown which continues for another 3 months, you can be rest assured most of the businesses in India will be able to survive. There are going to be segments, yes, which will see pain, no doubt. Anything related to hospitality, as I mentioned, hotel chains or whether it is travel, tourism, restaurants, etc., they will go through pain. The stronger ones will survive. Some of the weaker ones will not be able to survive it. But generally, when you look across sectors, including infrastructure, the balance sheets are clean, and hence, to that extent, they should be able to survive. In such a scenario, Nifty earnings. Let's talk about this. Nifty was supposed to deliver 30% earnings growth in FY22, this financial year. 30% in a single year. It was supposed to be one of the strongest comeback for Nifty companies. But what happened because of the second wave, there have been cuts. The estimates are today between 20 to 25% for the Nifty. Having said that, even if it is 20% Nifty growth for FY22, it is a very strong growth. Again, in perspective of what Nifty growth we have always seen. And remember, if the economy opens up by next year, and things more or less come back to normal, you are going to see another year of at least 20% growth on the Nifty. So cumulatively, 2 years put together, where you have 40% earnings growth, we have rarely seen that happening in the country. Rarely. And in such a scenario, now let's talk about market valuations, etc., where people are worried that the prices look expensive. How do we go about and deal it? See, uh, valuations are expensive today on a PE basis, which is what people look at. That is because the E is missing in the denominator. The earnings are not coming through. It had started coming through, again it went into a dip. Our belief is once you see FY22 earnings and FY23 earnings, Nifty on an FY22 basis is looking more like 18 to 19 PE today. And on an FY23 basis, sorry, my mistake. Nifty is looking at about 26 times FY22 earnings. And on an FY23 basis, it's looking about 18 to 19 times, which is a very reasonable Nifty earnings PE, Nifty PE to have in a rising earnings this thing. So please keep that in mind. Today, frankly speaking, when you take the next 2 years earnings, Nifty is more or less reasonably valued. If you think of it, people are worried about the Nifty being where it is. In 2008, I think so, the Nifty was about 21,000. So in that perspective, from a point to point, Nifty hasn't given you any major this thing over the last 12 years, 12 or 13 years in that sense. So our sense is the next 5 years, markets will give you very good returns. There is absolutely no doubt on that. More importantly, it's going to be front-ended rather than back-ended, because you're going to have 2 good years of earnings. Now, to put everything in perspective, so the negative only is FIIs can take out money, but we are not seeing that happening also in a big way, because they also realize earnings in India will be pretty strong. Now, from a GDP perspective and from an earnings perspective, the next 2 years are going to be, this year and the next year are going to be very strong years. So in such a scenario, to expect a deep correction in the market, I wouldn't vouch for it. I think markets can correct 5-7%, probably a 10%, but there is enough and more of liquidity waiting on the sidelines to jump into the markets. So that is the view on the markets. We will use every opportunity of a dip into the market to invest. Now, there is another question which usually comes across, so I will address it beforehand. How do we go and invest? Should we do SIPs, STPs, or should we do lump sum? See, what we have always vouched for in PGIM is SIPs, etc. are fine. But if you have a 3-5 year view, and you have 100 rupees, which is for equity markets, irrespective of the markets, if you really have a 5-year view, go ahead and put 60-70 rupees immediately. It doesn't matter. Now, the remaining 30%, 30 rupees, you can go and put it into a bank account. What happens? Let's say the markets rally. You are at least invested 60 to 70 rupees in the markets. If the market's correct, you still have 30 rupees to put into the markets, right? So that gives you the opportunity to do it. Over the next 3-5 years, our sense is you should be able to, a good fund house should be able to generate those 16 to 18% kind of returns. And that would ideally mean that there are chances that even from here, a well-constructed portfolio should be able to double money. And mind you, again, the returns will probably be front-ended rather than back-ended. So that's the view on the markets, Neeraj. Now coming to,
So, Anirudh, can you also touch upon the schemes which are run by the government, like PLI scheme, how they are going to benefit equity, and how you see, the US is talking about major spending on their infrastructure.
Absolutely.
How you see that panning out for India? How we
Sure.
can benefit out of it?
So see, the PLI scheme is something which the government has been talking about, and not just talking. Actually, we are seeing on ground. There is a lot of interest from corporate India. Not just corporate India. In fact, companies outside India are ready to set up manufacturing facilities in India. The scheme is basically aimed at drawing investments, setting up companies, etc., in the country from a manufacturing perspective for a lot of things which are presently imported. So there are PLI schemes for white goods, electronic goods. They're talking about the chip manufacturing. They're talking about textiles. So a lot of sectors where they are looking at it very actively to bring in manufacturing into the country. See, if this happens, the simple thing that will happen is it will create jobs. There is no doubt. The second thing that will happen is it will cut down on the import bill, which India has to pay. So if foreign exchange outflow will reduce to an extent. And third is finally the aim is India is a low cost manufacturing country. So India should be able to start exporting from India as a base to global markets. And in that case, from foreign exchange outflow, you will actually reach a situation where there will be foreign exchange inflows into the country because of the manufacturing facilities. The government is also, to that extent, reduced rates for new companies to be set up. It's come down from 25% to 15%. So for an entrepreneur today, it is one of the best times to go ahead and set up businesses because there is demand, the government is supporting it, and you can actually go ahead and build a business for yourself. It will also be it will draw in foreign exchange. It will draw in a lot of money getting invested into the country to that extent. And finally, as I said, employment creation will be a big thing that could play out. We'll have to wait and see. In the white goods, etc., it has already started taking shape. In some of the sectors, it might take a little longer, but it is possible. See, one thing also which people don't realize, PLI is an interesting scheme, no doubt. There is one sector in India which has done very well. It is a global exporter today without the PLI schemes. The auto and auto ancillary sector. a simple industry. Today, India has become literally a global base for you name the brand, and India supplies to that. So even without incentives, if there is a situation where an industry can go ahead and do it, then there is very high likelihood that with these incentives, things can actually get better for a lot of the other businesses getting set up. So that's one part of the PLI scheme. Second part is, as Neeraj mentioned, he rightly mentioned, actually infrastructure spend is one of the way to get out of a slowing economy. And this is something which even China is trying to do, the US is trying to do, and India is trying to do. Three major economies who are trying to do this. Now, spending on infrastructure will definitely increase the demand for a lot of commodities. Not that much, maybe oil and crude to that extent, but whether it is copper, cement, steel, iron ore, you name it, aluminium, etc., there will be enough and more of demand for commodities. So we foresee that that demand will happen. Infrastructure spend, some of the companies in India, especially supplying capital goods and engineering goods to the West, they should benefit out of it. There is one risk: if commodities become too expensive, it will be inflationary generally across the world, and that is something one needs to keep at the back of your mind. And hence, accordingly, portfolios have to be created. The other part is, just since I'm touching on inflation, one more thing that is happening globally, food prices had also moved up, but now they have started, tapering off. And over the next 6 months, we believe food prices, at least what the specialists are saying on this segment, food prices should start tapering off, and hence they will not be very inflationary to that extent. So the PLI scheme is good. Then the infrastructure scheme that is being built, that is being done, that is also good. In India also, I think so, there is a clear focus on building up infrastructure, because infrastructure is one segment where you garner the maximum amount of employment that happens. Now, coming to investments, how do you pick a stock, etc., or how do you build a portfolio? So this is interesting, because what we would like to highlight is, we've of late seen a lot of people wanting to invest on their own, and rather than going through their mutual funds, etc. Our only advice is, you should probably be doing it, but to do that, you must build your competence in doing it. See, what happens is, many people who invest into stocks today don't know why they are investing into. Let's say they go ahead and buy HDFC Bank. Great, it's a fantastic franchise, no doubt. Or a Hindustan Unilever, fantastic franchise, no doubt. And they will survive for the next 10 years, 20 years. But what has helped them build that? What has taken them, or what has given this thing that they will not be vulnerable to businesses, is what you have to understand, and then track those things or those parameters, that these are the parameters which have made these businesses not so vulnerable and consistent, and these are the parameters you will keep tracking, so that in case they become vulnerable, you know when to exit. That is very important. Just the fact that they have done well, let's say Bajaj Finance has done very well in the future, in the past, doesn't mean it will get replicated over and over again. There could be mistakes, there could be things which could change. So that is the only thing one needs to understand, that why should I invest in it and when will I exit? That is very important. And this is something which boils down from the largest of the stocks to the smallest of the stock. You must know why you are buying that business. What are the factors that one needs to keep in the back of your mind, and then go ahead and invest. So I'll talk about our process, what we do, and this is something which could also help you people probably look at stocks. If you want to look at stocks, or at least it will give you the confidence of what we do at PGIM, that should give you also confidence. See, our process is first aimed at reducing mistakes or eliminating mistakes. So people come to the equity markets just to make returns. Our focus is, you should make risk adjusted returns, so that you can try and eliminate risks as far as possible. You will not be able to eliminate the full risk, but at least as far as possible, reduce it, and then look at returns. Returns will always follow. So we look at something called the operating cash flows. This is where we start, the OCF. Operating cash flows are the cash flows generated from the operations of a business. We don't look at profit and loss first. to that extent. That is the last of the things that we look at. After assessing a business, we look at OCF. OCF, as I said, is the cash flows generated from the operations of a business. Now we look into the history of a company over the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And the companies must have generated OCF, positive operating cash flows in 70% of the time in the history. This is the most important thing, this parameter of 70%. If the operating cash flows are not predictable, if the history has been, volatile in terms of generating of operating cash flows, those are companies one should avoid, because invariably in a down cycle they might not be able to survive a down cycle. So our focus is on, in the down cycle, have these companies generated cash flows, and if they have generated cash flows in the down cycle, they should be able to generate cash flows in the up cycle, no doubt on that. So 70% of the time in the history, a company must have positive OCF. After looking at the balance cash flow, we come to the balance sheet. And in the balance sheet, we again look for some cleanliness of the balance sheet. Companies must not have any major debt. Companies can have some debt, but what we do in while measuring debt, we say net debt to equity should be less than 2. So debt levels should be manageable to an extent where the company can go ahead and pay the interest and the debt over a period of time. Any company which has net debt to equity of less than above 2 is something we will avoid. It clearly means the risks are building in. So that is the second criteria. Now this first criteria of cash flow and second criteria of net debt to equity put together can eliminate a lot of risks for you in terms of taking away capital. So these are the two criteria that we look at. And third, we look at into the history of a company, there must be no major corporate governance issues. So these three put together, they will act as a safety net for anyone looking to invest into stocks directly. But our suggestion is investing into stocks or studying stocks is a full-time job actually. If you can devote time to it, it is a fantastic place to spend time in. But if you can't do it, then probably take the advice of good people like Neeraj around who can help you build wealth rather than trying to fiddle around with stock set. Second part of it is once you have taken care of the safety part, then we look at businesses which have good amount of capital or knowledge quotient to grow businesses to that extent. Finally, I'll just touch upon why do you probably take a look at PGIM. Okay, PGIM and then the international investing is also something that we'll talk about. Before coming to PGIM, international investing, whether you should look at it or not. See, you have to understand India is about 3% of the world economy, just 3%. Today, when you are investing into either the fixed deposits, debt or equity of India, you are playing around in a pond which is 3%, which is a very small pond. No doubt, a large part of your money should be in this pond. But what we believe is some of the best businesses in the world, whether it is Amazon, Netflix, you name it, Apple's, Microsoft, Shopify, Mercado Libre, any of the big companies which are transformational in that sense, are just not there in India. It will take at least another 5 to 10 years for such businesses to come in India, if not longer. So what you're doing is by investing only in India, you are missing out on an opportunity of investing into some of these fantastic high growth companies globally. So what we have advocated is about 10 to 15%, if not 20% of your money should go into some good global fund where to capture these growth opportunities that are there. Now, how do you invest into them? This is something which is more an asset allocation perspective. Don't look at capital gains. You might not make big capital gains probably for 3 years also. I'm just saying. But over the period of the next 5-10 years, a lot of money will be made in such businesses. And hence, what we suggest is keep your goals at the back of your mind. Maybe your kids going out to study somewhere, or you probably trying to spend your later half of your life outside India, etc. With that in your mind, at least allocate 10 to 15%, if not 20% of your investable surplus through an SIP, STP mode into 1 or 2 good global funds, and forget it. Don't worry about what money you make there. 5 or 10 years down the line, I am sure when your requirement for forex comes, where you need to actually buy forex, these fund returns will be able to compensate a large part of that requirement, because they will take care of the currency depreciation also. So we always and will always advise that investors should look at global opportunities to invest into some of these global funds. Uh, it will create wealth and it gives you diversification away from the country. Lastly, why should you look at probably PGIM, some of the PGIM funds? I manage the mid cap and the flexi cap. Then we have some global funds out there. I also manage the balance advantage fund. We have a large cap. We have a good long-term equity or a tax fund. The reason why you probably look at my funds is one is we have a very low overlap with other funds, which is about 30%. So only 30% is common and 70% is uncommon in my funds. So if we are able to pick stocks well, that 70% is where you will create alpha. Let's say you have 3 or 4 mid cap funds to invest into. If you invest some part of it in our fund, even within the mid cap category, we will be able to create diversification. Same is the case with the flexi cap. Secondly, we've given decent allocation towards mid and small caps also. We believe in the next 2 to 3 years, as the economy broadens and recovery process continues, the mid and small caps will do very well. Finally, we've looked at businesses which are clean, without debt, and hence you won't find too much of a risk in these portfolios. So Neeraj, that will be from my side. You can go ahead and take up this thing.
Great, Anirudh. It was a good insight. One more thing which was coming to my mind. Yes, we see in last 1 year we are now touching new highs, but before that, how the Indian markets were doing, because we were beaten by once from the demonetization, then from GST, something or another was hitting us as an economy.
Right,
So,
right.
is it not that for that lapse time also we have to make it, and we should we look these numbers sacrosanct, or should we look beyond? Because what happens is, whenever we look at the market, we look at the number and just a number,
Right,
and
right.
people say it's all time high. I say it's high till date,
Yes, absolutely.
right? So
Right,
when we look at these numbers, and behavior has much more role to play into all this. So
right.
how you see market in that sense, that what kind of a return should have been delivered which has not been delivered, and what kind of a return from here in next 5 years one can look at if we put at kind of some number basis of a GDP growth and other
So
things.
Neeraj, I'll tell you frankly speaking, what has already been missed, you can put any number. It'll be of no consequence. Let's say I'm saying we missed in 2 years 50% growth. It doesn't make any difference, frankly speaking. But what is important is, I think so this time around, at least the government, without talking about COVID, the government had actually maneuvered the economy very well towards growth. And this is reflective. You think of it, GST 3 years back was a pain. Today, the GST numbers are the highest. Compliance is high. So things were all moving in the right direction. Capacity utilization in the country, just to give you another sense, was the highest level in 2020 January. 76%. Capacity utilization means that if a company or the country has 100 units to produce, actually how many units were being produced? We were at the highest level of 76% plus. 80% plus means a fantastic growth economy coming through. If we were unfortunate, COVID wave first hit and then the second wave hit, our belief is after post vaccination, it will take another probably 6 to 9 months to come back to those 80% levels again, which is again a very fantastic thing to happen, because it will invariably push entrepreneurs or businessmen to start expanding capacities because demand is there. So our sense, to be realistic, you please don't hold me to this 5 years down the line, because we don't know how things will exactly play out. But I believe 16 to 18% growth in earnings for businesses in India is a definite possibility. And hence, that is what I said, in 5 years' time, can markets or a good fund house go ahead and double NAVs? I think so, it is possible. There is no doubt on that. And vis-a-vis other asset classes, I don't see any other asset class which can match this kind of returns, frankly speaking.
Great, Anirudh. So we have some questions now coming up. We have a question from Mr. Balraj.
Sure.
What he says is, how about the crude risk in the market, especially with reference to Iran and its nuclear deal? both if it happens or if it fails?
See, if thank you for this question, Mr. Balraj. I think so. Crude is a different animal now. One thing you have to understand, people are looking for alternatives to crude, and there are alternatives already. India is talking about a 20% blended rate with ethanol. Then electricity and hydrogen are two fuels which people are really working on. In the Western world and in China especially, the adoption of these technologies are far ahead of time. So to that extent, crude that you see today, our belief is this is a manipulated price where because Iran is not there in the market, plus it's a consortium of people out countries out there trying to drive the markets. But invariably over time, can crude go to 80? It can go to 80. Will it hurt India? Yes, temporarily it will hurt India, no doubt. But I think up to $75 also, India will be fine. That shouldn't be an issue. It should be able to manage. Anyway, whether it is 60 or 75, the petrol prices in India are moving up anyway. It doesn't matter whether you have crude at $20 or $35 or $75. But our sense is this dependability on crude will, for the overall world, will come up dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years. And hence, crude is not a big risk. I would think uh, inflation from other commodities would be something that I would look at very closely. I think crude has alternatives, and if Iran comes through, today Iran is not there in the market in a big way. If Iran comes, I think so there will be pressure on crude oil prices. But yes, if crude shoots to $100 plus, I would be a little skeptical on how markets will behave in the country. But it will be temporary because uh, what it does is it moves beyond 100 or let's say $120. It kills its own market. The demand gets completely wiped off, and then it falls all the way down to 60, 50, or 40.
Okay, so we have another interesting question, Anirudh, which
Uh-huh.
is a blend of what Mr. Balraj is asking and Mudit is asking about the startups. You know, they are coming up with Zomato has just announced that they are likely to come, and Flipkart may also come in. So, how you see when these kind of big unicorns coming to the market, to the capital market? Is it good, bad? How?
So see, frankly speaking, I think the listing of these unicorns, as we call them, is good in the sense they bring a lot of businesses which are presently not available in the listed space. They come to the listed space, but so very interesting businesses which will grow over the next 3 5 years, over the next 10 years probably, and become large businesses. But one thing which I always caution people is businesses finally we buy them for cash flows and profitability. So there is a thing that one needs to keep at the back of our mind. This is a part of our investment philosophy. Top line is vanity, bottom line is sanity, and cash flow is reality. So companies with huge top line, huge sales, it makes no difference. It's only vanity. Companies with bottom line in profits are still okay, but it can be manipulated. What is reality? Reality is cash flows because you can't play around with cash flows. So just keep that in mind when you're buying businesses. Some of these businesses, unicorns, which will get listed, don't have the profitability and cash flows, and it could be a long time before they do that. So in this market frenzy, one needs to be very careful about what you are investing into. So, and remember, most of these unicorns are backed by private equity guys, right? These private equity guys, if they're selling it off now, after having made the money, one has to be careful about whether you should give them the exit to their exit. That is something I would just want to. I would only caution people that valuations, cash flows, and profits is all that matters. Rest is all how mein.
True, Anirudh. I think fundamentals are the basic, as you rightly said. Your ROC and the cash flow is very, very important. So
Absolutely.
we have another question. You know, a day before yesterday, our governor he stated that market is in a bubble. Don't touch it.
Mhm.
How you read that statement?
See, I think so. They are looking, what happens is they are looking at the markets from the present earnings or the historical, because the RBI is always uh, looked at things of how is the FY21 earnings been, and then they comment on it. My sense is, frankly, I mean, I'm not the right person, I'm too small a person to say this, but this is not the RBI's mandate or space or area to look into. There is demand and there are supplies, and that is what determines the valuations. Our sense is clearly over the next 2 years, as earnings come through at the same levels, markets will look far cheaper than where they are. So I wouldn't be too bothered actually about what the RBI says. Anyway, that is not their area of expertise, and it is good to comment on it. That's fine, but I think so one should take it with a pinch of salt.
Okay. We have another question from Arindam, and the question is that what should be ideal spread of investment between debt and equity?
So Arindam, I will, that was something I leave it to Neeraj. He realizes, see, I'll tell you why. The reason is I don't know what is the individual investor's risk profile. What is his risk appetite? Neeraj probably handles his clients far better than probably a lot of other people. He realizes what is the risk appetite and then probably allocates accordingly. So, depending on your risk appetite, if let's say you are uh, someone who is ready to take the highest bracket of risk but are looking at more returns with a 5 years perspective, and you are not bothered about this 10-15% drawdowns, then it has to be equities, because that is where you will make money. On the other hand, if there is a retired gentleman or a lady who wants to participate a little bit in equities, but it mainly wants to stick to the safer instruments, then it will probably be a balance advantage fund, with a balance advantage with only 30% in equities, the rest going into fixed income and arbitrage products. So that is something where I think so Neeraj is far more capable than me to decide on how much should be the allocation towards equity and debt.
So one more question is, when do you see some growth coming to hospitality and travel industry?
See, I think so. In our portfolios, we have started looking at them very closely. We think FY23 should be a good transformational year. Especially, let me put in a little more insight on this. Next year, the world, with vaccinations through, the world will slowly start opening up. But for all said and done, I think so, they will wait at least 6, 7 months or 9 months before opening up of Indian travelers going outside, because countries will be skeptical. They will take their time to open it up for Indian travelers. So there is going to be a period of at least 6, 9 months, if not 12 months, where the Indian hospitality industry will go through a fantastic time, because in, Indians are generally wanting to travel, and that is the time frame where they will only get the Indian markets to travel in. So we are positive. We have already started working on this segment, and I think so. If someone has a 3-5 year view, this is a good time to start looking at it.
Okay. So Anirudh, if someone has a 100 rupees to put in into equity, how you would like to distribute that between different economies like US, India, China, and Europe?
So, see, there again, it's an asset allocation call. But what we are clearly saying is uh, India has to be the major part, at least 80%, around 80% in India. The remaining 20%, I think so. What you can do is you break it up between emerging market and a developed market. Okay. And there, what we are seeing is there are some very interesting companies in the emerging market basket also, and there are some very interesting businesses in the developed markets basket also. Now, our products, we have one emerging market fund and one a global fund, more or less representing the segments that we talked about. So what you could do is an 80% into Indian funds and a 10% each, or let's say a 12% to 15% in the global and 5 to 8% in the emerging market would be a good allocation, I think.
Okay. And if the same question I ask in term of large cap, mid cap, and small cap in domestic equities?
That again, Neeraj, is the investor's risk profile, frankly speaking. So it will depend on what is the risk profile he takes. If he doesn't want risk, balance advantage, which is even safer than the large cap, is the best place. But if he is ready to take larger risk for returns over the next 5 years, and he has the capacity to withstand a 10% downside, let's say, then it has to be more nearer to the mid and small caps. So there again, I think so you will be able to assess your clients far better than me from a risk perspective.
Okay. So we have another question from Mr. Ajay. And his question is, what is your view on debt funds? And does it make sense to lock into fixed rate options for short term?
This, Neeraj, I am not the right person. I will have to hand it to Anup. Maybe he handles it, or he gets back to you with a solution, answer to this.
So Neeraj, my take on this is very simply put. fixed maturity plans are driven by the interest rate which is currently into the economy. So as you see that the interest rate, they keep on going down, the FMP rates, the yields will also be lower, because that is how we are investing into papers which are available in the market. It's all basically on the basis of the interest rate which are prevalent in the economy. So today, if you are looking at investments which are risk averse, which are not risky, you can invest into FMPs. It does not matter whether the current yields are lower. You will not be able to time in. What you can do is you can go in for small duration of FMPs. That is advisable. But if you can keep it into open-ended debt funds, then Neeraj will provide you with a list of open-ended options that will be available. They will be more suited. And subsequently, if in the next 1.5, 2 odd years, you see the interest rates going up, you can move back to the FMPs. But having said that, if you have little bit of appetite on the risk side, then as Anirudh also said previously, you can look at funds like balance advantage funds. Neeraj can again advise you there, which invest around 30% into equities. They will give you some bit of equity participation, and the rest is into debt and arbitrage, which gives you taxation benefits also. So that is how it is. But there is no concrete answer whether this is the best time to invest into FMPs or not. Long-term scenario, if you were to see, the interest rates across the globe are going down, and they are going down structurally. And over a short period of time, the interest rate may move up and be volatile. But then you will have to take a call. When is it that you want to time in getting into the FMPs?
Sure. Thanks, Anup. So, Anirudh, one more interesting question coming to mind. What are those three sectors which looks promising to you going forward, and what are the sector which you would like to say not to touch?
So we've remained very positive on IT. This is a sector which we believe over the next 12 to 24 months will continue to do well. The adoption of technology in the US has been phenomenally fast, and to that extent, the implementation part, Indian companies will benefit from it. We believe capital expenditure will start coming back. So capital goods or engineering goods is something that we are positive on. That is something that we believe will continue to do well. And last sector that we believe should continue to do well is chemicals and agrochemicals. That is another sector where we believe there is decent long-term growth over the next 3-5 years. And that is another sector where we will be positive. On the negative side, I will tie in the answer with a question which I saw. It was a very good question from Mr. Balraj said about people having consumed substantial part of their savings. And with high inflation, how do things go ahead? We are hence been a little negative on consumption generally. We think the last decade things were okay, but this time around there is going to be an impact on the consumption basket. People are going to consume less. The higher strata people who are getting vaccinated, etc., there will not be much of an impact. They will continue to consume the luxury goods, etc., which they do. I think what will happen is in the middle and the lower middle segment, people will downtrade. They will go for lesser price products to save savings. And in the consumption basket, earlier on, if healthcare was only 5-10 rupees out of 100, that will go up to 20-25 rupees at least, where people will get conscious about healthcare generally. And that moving towards healthcare, people will have to give up on some certain points of consumption to compensate or grow the healthcare segment. So we are underweight consumption, especially discretionary consumption as far as possible, and consumer staples, we don't have any consumer staples. So that is a segment where we will be negative.
Great. So, Anirudh, we have touched most of the items on the agenda. So we can have our concluding marks, because some of the participants have joined us late. If you can just summarize, and we can then close.
Sure. So again, Neeraj and everyone, I mean, thank you for this opportunity. On conclusion, all we want to say is at headline Nifty Sensex might look expensive, but the earning strength over the next 2 years and the GDP growth rates that are going to play out over the next 2 years will make the Indian markets look lucrative enough, and valuations are also very reasonable, are going to get reasonable in the next 2 years, because we foresee a 20 to 25% earnings growth over the next 2 years in terms of the Nifty. And if the Nifty can deliver those numbers, the markets generally will become more broad-based, and mid caps and small caps will also keep participating. We believe the next 5 years, there is not going to be any other asset class which can probably beat equities in terms of returns. Also, from an investing point of view, we go ahead and always vouch that 60-70% of money which is supposed to be for equities should get invested in a lump sum. The remaining 30%, you can keep it on the sidelines. Any correction of 10-15% in the markets, if it happens, should be used as an opportunity to go ahead and invest. So that is from our side, I think so, Neeraj. Again, I would like to thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Anirudh. Thanks. It was an insightful session. And thank you so much for giving us your time on Saturday. Thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Stay
Thanks.
safe.
Take care. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, viewers. Thanks.
Bye.